I live in a little hamlet that sits above an old slate mine that was abandoned sometime around the early 60s. From what I've been told, an accident occurred involving explosives and the unfortunately timed discovery of an underground lake or spring of some sort. The lower levels of the mines had flooded, and the accident had killed a considerable team of people, though I don't believe I've ever been told an actual number. I am not originally from this area, though I have lived here for near a decade now, and I believe the locals took great joy in telling me all sorts of ghost stories from the mines when I first arrived. Intriguing as their tales were, I've always been quite skeptical of the supernatural, and thus I've never really believed them. These days, however, I see my neighbours much less than I once had, and the few instances I have happened upon anyone in recent times are certainly not as friendly an encounter as they once were. I couldn't tell you what changed, nor when exactly, but what had once been this kindly, close-knit little community is now so distant. The people themselves haven't changed, just the way they act. They're so reserved and unfriendly now, even to each other, it seems. Many of them I haven't even seen for at least a year or so now. I know they're all still there. The lights are on at night, and cars come and go from driveways. Our homes are far apart, but few enough in number that I'm sure I'd notice someone moving away, even if no one speaks anymore. Recently, as well, while I've been out for walks when the weather is fair, I hear some unfamiliar noises. It's near impossible to go anywhere within a mile radius of the hamlet without finding an opening to the mines. Whether it's an old shaft and the rusted remnants of a lift, or a shunted track and the boarded off moor, or just a natural opening to the caverns below. I've sat beside such openings before, heard nothing more than the occasional drip of water in what must now be miles of flooded tunnels. Until, I'd say, about 2 weeks ago or so. I first noticed it while out on such a walk, when I had stopped to rest beside one of the cavernous entrances and take a drink. I hadn't been there for long, perhaps 20 or 30 seconds or so, when I had heard this terrible sort of scraping sound coming from the mine. Loud, but still difficult to tell exactly what it was with the echo of the cave and its distance. At the time, I had attributed it to an animal, as there was nothing else it could have logically been, even if there's nothing local to the area that I could think of that might have the ability to produce the sound of rock dragging on rock. Still, I had no intention of panicking myself with an overactive imagination, especially while still a good 45 minutes away from home, and I certainly had no intention of investigating. The opening of the mine had been fenced off with chicken wire and barbed at the top anyway, so I'd had no way of venturing inside even if I'd wanted to. I had returned home, cutting my walk a little short and making the conscious decision not to dwell on that particular sound anymore. The second time was a similar situation. Again, while I was walking, this time by a thin ventilation shaft carved into the cliffside, about 2 foot up and grated over with wrought iron bars. There had been the sound of a splash of something heavy hitting the water below, just as I was walking past. My immediate thoughts had been that some of the rock ceiling of that particular part of the mine was crumbling away, and I had turned on my heel almost immediately to leave the area, obviously unwilling to be caught in a potential cave-in or rock slide. Though, just as I was leaving, I was sure I heard the sound of the water below moving again, rhythmically, almost in time with my own footsteps, as if someone was wading through it. Of course, again, I hadn't stayed to investigate, and not with the looming danger of the terrain moving around me. Another time was while I was still within the safety of my own home. At night, just before I had planned to retire for the evening, I was just closing my bathroom window after releasing the steam from my bath, when there had been this terrible shriek that had echoed through the countryside. It hadn't sounded particularly close, but it had been loud and quite human. Though, had you ever heard a fox or a deer call before, you might know that doesn't have to equate to much. Many wildlife creatures could sound not dissimilar to humans, which was my reasoning to keep my calm at the time. Still, I had locked all of my windows and doors quite firmly that night. All of these instances thus far, I found I could still equate to some sort of reasonable explanation that would at least quell my worry that something peculiar was going on around our hamlet. That is, until I finally saw something in the far distance behind my home. And my recollection of it is a little foggy at this point. I think I've replayed the memory so many times in a vain attempt to make sense of it that it's become distorted to me now. I had assumed it was human at first, as it walked upright and it seemed to stand around an average height, perhaps a little taller than usual and lanky in form. Though it was difficult to tell exactly with the distance and the slight mist that had settled on the ground that day, I don't think it noticed me. I was within the confines of my garden and stood close enough to the brick wall of my house that I think I was hidden. And then this thing had hunched down on all fours and just ran far faster than I'd ever thought a human could run on their hands and feet, and it disappeared behind the rock and the mist cover. I ran too, locking my doors behind me, and I didn't have the strength to check out my windows if it was truly gone. I tried to explain it away as perhaps children or teenagers playing around, but there are no children here and no homes or roadways that side of my house for miles. Or perhaps it was someone mentally ill or just strange, living rough in the area. But the way that thing had moved, the speed at which it ran, I try to be rational and logical about everything in my life, but now I don't know what to think. 3 days ago that I saw it, and since then those shrieks at night have become louder, as if more bold or drawing closer, which makes me wonder if perhaps it did see me after all. And last night, I'm sure I heard the sound of bare footsteps running beside the house just before something had been knocked over in one of the neighbours' gardens. I want to speak to my neighbours about it, but I've seen no one for days, and to be honest, I'm unwilling to leave my house alone. I telephoned a friend I know in town several times, the only person I'm really close to in the area anymore, but they haven't picked up or called me back, so this morning I finally gave in and telephoned the police. They said they'd send someone out to check the area, but I've yet to see anyone. I've wondered if perhaps I've hallucinated this entire thing, that this quite isolated life I live has somehow gotten to me more than I'd ever thought it might. But then I hear those shrieks again and movement, and I think if something is living in those minds, if there's a reason I haven't seen anyone for too long now, are my neighbours safe? Do they even know what's going on? Perhaps if they're all staying indoors for the same reason as I, or if they've truly left the hamlet already and gone somewhere safer, or perhaps if something terrible has already happened to them. Am I the only one left?